I tend to be an optimistic person by nature, but I would rather be cautiously optimistic in this particular case. I'm still hoping that we could come up with a timetable, something definite and concrete, to make sure that the arrangements for 2015 do not take place literally on the eve of the conference itself, but that from now on and thereon, we shall have an actual roadmap that will actually pave the way. We cannot leave these preparations until the very end. So I think the momentum needs to be seen and felt by one and all between now and even 2014, particularly in view of the high-level summit which Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the UN, will be organizing next year with a view to revitalize and re-energize the whole process itself.
Finance is clearly such a big issue, and the EU is so critical in that. Is it your sense that there may be some more good news later on funding for climate-related activities?
The problem is that the pledges are there in the majority of cases, even though now the whole issue has come up to the boil with wonky issues like typhoons and other issues. But I think the actual thing is to getting down to deliverables, to actually see the pledges translated into real contributions for the countries in need. So this could be a stumbling block, but let us hope that all these pledges will actually materialize into concrete results. Because unless this actually happens, I think the divide between the rich and the poor countries will widen further rather than having a narrowing of the gap.
I'd be interested to find what you think Malta's kind of role in the talks is. I suppose being a developed but small island state,
Yes.
You can empathise with other smaller island states who are under acute stresses and strains. How does Malta's position help the country and help representatives like you interact with other members, other delegations
Yes.
at this conference?
Well, Malta has three different roles. It's a sovereign state, it's an EU member state, and it's also a country which is in the center of the Mediterranean. I will touch upon the latter aspect. But we obviously have our EU obligations which we intend to fulfill to the hilt, especially as far as the whole package is concerned on energy and climate. I think we cannot ignore the Mediterranean dimension, challenges and opportunities. Our emissions are obviously small compared to those of other countries. But as a central Mediterranean country, I think we live in a region which is very vulnerable to climate issues, existing and potential. And my biggest concern is that it would be a big mistake to merely treat climate issues as if they were purely environmental. That would be a very one-dimensional approach. I think we have to look at the aspect of the socio-economic impact, and even beyond that, especially because of developments to our south in North Africa, at the geostrategic implications of climate change. And that is why I believe very strongly in the need for climate diplomacy.
And are we seeing enough climate diplomacy at this conference? I suppose from a media perspective, you only get the louder statements and the press releases, but are you seeing enough talking?
Unfortunately, in these types of conferences, it's difficult sometimes to try and match the rhetoric with the actual results on the ground. But I think there are important events coming up. I think that the Ban Ki-moon summit of next year is, on one hand, a high-risk strategy because of the way things had run riots in Copenhagen some time back. But on the other hand, it will be a bigger challenge for the big countries, so that at least they can ensure that by the time the 2015 Paris conference takes place, there will already be an important hurdle to overcome. My sincere wish is that rather than leaving things to the tail end, all the countries, Malta included, should do their homework as of now, between now and 2014, so that when the summit takes place next year, it won't be the usual customary summitry, but something where the road will have been paved in advance before the actual summit. Otherwise, we'll have a lot of platitudes and a lack of tangible results. But on the other hand, I am impressed by the commitment which the Secretary General of the UN has always shown throughout. So I think that his initiative, 1 year ahead of the Paris summit, I think is timely. As I said, a bit of a high risk politically, but at the same time, even if this conference of today will have inconclusive results, it might be the necessary spark and catalyst to give momentum where it might have been lacking in the Warsaw summit.
Is it just touching finally on that UN summit, the Ban Ki-moon summit, is it a risk for the Secretary General to sort of set a deadline for countries as it seems that he has done? Is that a sort of
Rather than question of deadlines, I think the risk is that if all the world leaders are going to get together at the UN come September of next year, and the outcome will be as disappointing as it was in Copenhagen, then that will actually dent the UN process itself and give added leverage to those countries who would like to disengage the UN from the whole climate debate. But on the other hand, I think that regardless of the outcome of today's or this week's meetings, the fact that this conference promoted by Mr. Ban Ki-moon is taking place in a year's time, 1 year ahead of the actual Paris summit, which should hopefully lead to a legally binding agreement, I think is well timed. So when I was talking about high risk, I wasn't referring to his initiative per se, but as to how the member states of the UN process will actually, perform and commit themselves in tangible ways.